All right. Hello, everyone. This is John Farrell, Senior Editor for TabletopGamingTrend.com. I am talking to Jack Berkenstock, the CEO of the Bodhana Group. And I would say it myself, but you're probably in a better position to explain exactly what your group does and how it operates within the tabletop space.
Sure, absolutely. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are all about advocating for and utilizing all manner of tabletop games for education, therapy, and capacity building. So as opposed to going to the educational and fun store, we actually use the games that people like to play and that are, just have great game mechanics. But we find how gaming has a natural ability to help with skill development and specifically board games we use for skill building and RPGs we specifically use for therapeutic use, as well as education in general.
And I'd just like to ask for you to go into a little more detail because I find it surprising when you're playing RPGs or board games how you find yourself encountering these things. You discover a lot about yourself, about your capabilities, you discover a lot about group dynamics, but until I came across your group, I hadn't really seen people try to add real developed scholarship to that. And I know that you have an intense training course for people that you want to be involved in your program. So you've thought it out very well, how to apply things like cognitive behavioral therapy to RPGs. And I'm just really interested to hear more about how that was developed and what it looks like in practice.
Sure, absolutely. So the basic idea, the way that we describe it, is that games, by their very nature, you kind of mentioned where it started, which is self-discovery. People who play initially just for kind of, it's very socially pleasing. You're getting together with other people. You're having that shared collaborative experience. What we've kind of noticed is that from the initial, when people create characters, any creator will tell you you cannot create something that does not include any vestige or some vestige of yourself.
Yeah.
You create what you know. So initially we find that a lot of the people who come into our services create these very robust, deep character studies that reflect their foibles or some worries or fears or whatnot that they have. And basically, what we kind of do, quote unquote, is we kind of weaponize that. So by that I mean that first we start with the pick of the correct system. Client preference is always the case. So if they say, "Hey, we want to do D&D," sure, it's a bit clunky for therapy in our opinion, which is why we typically prefer like sleeker independent systems because Kids on Bikes is a very big favorite of ours. Kids on Bikes, if you've ever played it, it's such a great player driven system that even down to creating the town together, creating established relationships between the characters, like all of those elements have this inherent ability to bring people together by creating the story. So what we then do is we find out, okay, this is what the person's goals are, this is what they want to work on, and we create storylines, specifically challenges within the narrative that help a person either experience something that they need to experience, whether it's emotional recognition or awareness. It might be maybe they are trying to deal with better conflict resolution. Well, we'll create NPCs and challenges within the narrative that incorporates some of those situations, like dealing with, a small town sheriff that is like, come on, you kids, and all your stories, whatnot. That could represent a parental presence in the person's life. It could represent bullies. It could represent social awkwardness. We try to basically find an analog for what we want to work on therapeutically within the structure and the narrative of the game. So we always start with what therapeutically would be best for the client. So you mentioned CBT. Very common CBT practices are things like exposure therapy. Well, what we'll do is we'll kind of teach your client, okay, you're trying to work over anxiety. Maybe it's social anxiety specifically. Well, let's create situations within the game that create that awkward sense. can the client first recognize when they're having, like an ab reaction or an emotional reaction, which also can mix in things like dialectical behavioral therapy and, other traditions. So we always say that the game is not the destination, but the game is the vehicle. So we pretty much, our training bears this out, that whatever tradition you come from, we find a way to replicate the techniques and the approaches from that tradition, utilizing the role play in the story as a unique approach or delivery system. So it's not, again, it's not role playing therapy, it's therapeutic role playing. And I know that sounds like I'm wordsmithing a little bit, but it's very important to us that the therapy has to come first. Otherwise, and I won't say devolve because it's not fun, but eventually it can just, you just run a fun game for a while and go, holy crap, I'm supposed to be doing therapy. So if you start with the therapeutic intent of what the client needs and how you can deliver it, it's a manner that's less confrontational, it's less aggressive, it's more fun for everybody. But it really is, at its heart, it is very serious work to find this.
What is the difference in what you get out of role playing as a tool to normal talk-based therapy? I mean, in some ways, it's very similar. It's you and another person. They're structuring the conversation, but it's very driven by you. But I'm sure there are certain things that are unique to tabletop play that get brought, for lack of a better term, get brought to the table.
It's probably that it's more experiential and progressive. Like, we don't have to necessarily call it out as obviously as talk therapy, by like, well, it seems that you're experiencing this, or it appears that this is what you're going through. What we'll do is we'll set up, trying to think of a good convenient example. A little while ago we were doing a standard fantasy D&D campaign, and we were working with a lot of the members of the group on leadership. We were talking about, what makes a good friend, what makes a good leader, what makes a good, person to be around. So we created a number of challenges that pretty much were designed to exhibit, like they had said in a previous session, like, okay, so what do you think makes a good leader? Like, who's someone you would follow? And they all named different qualities, like, a leader is a good listener, a good leader is someone who deals well with conflict. Okay, cool. A leader is someone you can trust. All right, well, how do you know you trust somebody? And we took these conversations and we drafted them out into things like, okay, you're going to encounter NPCs who are having a conflict. You have to be the person who mediates the conflict. So we found a way within the story, or we created a manner in the story for them to kind of engage. And a lot of the kind of back and forth with it is trying to pretty much like determine like how they respond to the challenge is how you alter the presentation of the challenge. So it's a very active form of therapy. I would say that most of the time, though, it's not, okay, Johnny, we're going to go to the marketplace, so now it's time for you to practice your reciprocal communication goals. Like, that's not how this works. It's kind of like bowling. We set the pins up and we wait for the player to knock them down. And we have a lot of aha moments where players are like, wait a minute, are you telling me that I should like think about things before I choose what to do? Like, they'll have statements like this and we're like, I don't know, that's, is that what you got out of that? Like, tell us more. So it's discovery.
And it's interesting to hear you talk about this. My wife is a clinical psychologist, and it can be really difficult to get something through someone's head, even if it's something that makes sense and they sort of already believe. But it sounds like through play, you're not doing that. You're allowing them to come upon it themselves by realizing it. You don't have to say anything. You create the situation and let them, on their own terms, come to it and try to figure out how to deal with it.
And it actually plays with a lot of concepts of like neuroplasticity and what we're learning about, the nature of learning and the nature of behavioral, approaches in general, is that if you tell someone you're wrong, you're doing this wrong, or no, you need to fix this, our normal human condition, because of our brain, which is not as wonderful as we give it credit for, is actually Nope, our brain is predisposed to questioning things that are told to us.
Yeah.
But if we come upon that, wait a minute, that relates to me, it's more powerful because you're already connecting this new information to pre-existing condition. It's why things like tarot are so effective for people. Because it's not the card is prognosticating anything. It's I just said, well, this is what it could relate to. And then you go, wait, there's this energy in my life or this kind of situation. So that's why it seems so on point. But in this case, we're adding that other layer of intentional planning when we design, like I said, when we design NPCs, when we design situations or settings, you know, everything is an intentional piece. And there's even also a lot of, typical stuff that any GM would have to deal with is oh crap, I created this whole forest adventure and they want to go to the desert. Okay, greens get exchanged for khakis and we switch and we make changes, especially if we have very meaningful engagement. I have a very short story if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. This is all really interesting.
So we were running a game of Pugmire, which if you're not familiar with Pugmire, I know that you're familiar with the Onyx Path through our combo. So yeah, I love Eddie and I love everything Pugmire. So we were running an adventure that started out being just, a bunch of kids learning to work better with teams. We were also dealing with the pandemic at the time when we were running the group online. And so we offered this whole quest of, it was basically me trying to be kind of humorous and rickrolling my party, where they were going to find this uh, artifact within the realms of Pugmire that proved at one time cat, dog, and mouse lived peacefully together and coexisted. And the whole joke of the campaign was going to be they were going to find an animation cell of a Tom and Jerry cartoon where Tom and Jerry and Spike are drinking lemonade together. That was like the whole conceit was just, but that was the backdrop. And it was just they were going to work together and they were going to plan and strategize and, get some emotional upheavals. So throughout the course of this, we talked about the artifact, and one of the players, who's African American, said, "Well, wait a minute. Why is it only dogs, cats, and mice in the artifact? There's birds and lizards and rats. Why aren't they represented? Like, where are they?" And in that moment, like other members in the group started to go like, it's kind of like that. Hey, and what about Scarecrow's brain? Like everybody was talking about like people who are disenfranchised. And we said, all right, clearly there's an underpiece here that, because at the time it was Black Lives Matter and a lot of anti-gay, anti-trans, so we're talking about all these things that are going on in their young lives. So we changed the whole dynamic of the story to create different representations within the cultures of Pugmire that could represent racial divide, transphobia, and each of the players kind of grafted onto these identities, spoke for their tribe, and like they got so much out of it. But it's the beauty of that wasn't part of the original plan, but they were still working together. So that's how powerful it can be if you let the story do what it's supposed to do.
And it's especially interesting hearing this because I think what most GMs try to do with their games is avoid areas of discomfort. It's not
Right.
universal, but a lot of times people will say like, I'm just not going to have fun if you put me in a game and I have to really think about racism or transphobia or these economic issues that are crushing me. But in the vein of trying to make something therapeutic, you're specifically trying to lean into some of those uncomfortable topics, but doing it in a safer way. How do you do that? I mean, it seems like so much of the GM advice I see is to very general, like have a session 0, try to avoid those topics, and not here's how you approach this thing without making it too real, without making the metaphor too direct.
Tricky divide. I mean, we still do a lot of the same trappings that a lot of GMs do. Like we always run a session 0. We actually do, I would say, 3 different interface levels of safety tools and consent-based gaming. So we use session 0 and we talk initially about like lines and veils and such. We also utilize a tool. Tom Nelson is the designer of it's called the Deck of Player Safety, which if you haven't heard of it, please check it out. It's amazing. It's basically it's a deck that contains all of the common things that you're going to find in a list of please don't bring this into the game. Anything from cruelty to animals to PvP violence, list forms to the left. But what happens in this is everyone gets the deck before you play, and you pass the deck around, and there's not only these cards that are like quote unquote the bad thing, but there's also cards that say, yeah, I'm cool. Like anything goes. And every player must put down at least one card. So then what you do is after everyone has now anonymously put face down what they're not comfortable with, you shuffle the pile that you've gotten and you lay out all of your elements. So now everybody at the table knows what to use and what not to use during play. We then use a safety toolkit called Script Change, designed by Bo Yeager Sheldon. You can get it on itch.io for very adjustable rate. And it's erringly described as VCR by people because it uses like fast forward, rewind, instant replay, like buttons from a VCR, if you're old enough to know what those are, that you can like rewind a scene if something bad happened, or you can fast forward through a scene if it's too difficult. You could frame by frame if it's very slow. And we don't then like completely forget about all these topics. Sometimes if they come up, we might say over time, like, okay, we're really trying to work on our fear. How can we introduce that into the game in a way that doesn't trigger you, but also know that part of the job of therapy to a degree is to deal with the uncomfortable, which is usually the problem set that the person has. So it is something that sometimes we'll start out with, no, I don't want to talk about that. And like any person-centered approach, you respect where the player is, but then over time you're like, well, could we introduce it maybe a little bit, or could we introduce it in a different way? And even then, the structure of it being a narrative and not, well, it's not me going through this, it's my character going through this. Some players are even able to use that separation or that scaffolding. They call it aesthetic distance, whatever you want to use. We use that distance as a way to allow people to kind of safely immerse themselves in what they clearly know they have a problem with, but maybe the character they're playing isn't socially anxious. You know what I mean? So there's a couple of ways that we do that, but yeah, a lot of this is where do we need to go? How can we get there? But also making sure that player safety is, it's use of trauma-informed care principles, pretty much.
And I am going to include links to your site and these resources you've mentioned below so people can reference them. I will encourage people to check them out. I know some people are averse to the idea of safety tools for bad reasons. Some of them just sort of think they're unnecessary, but if you are new to role-playing or not, you can really be surprised. Even with people that you are good friends with, somewhere along the line, something will come up, and you'll start to realize it's a bigger problem, and you may or may not know how to deal with it. And you've seen on all of the Facebook groups or Reddit posts, there's somebody coming up with saying, this thing happened, I don't know how to do, and the answer is you need to talk to your group like adults, but that doesn't give a lot of specificity about what you should talk about or how you should structure that conversation.
Actually, if folks check us out, we also do have a YouTube channel, we have a Twitch channel, and we have some presentations that we used to do at past Save Against Fear events. And in general, we have an interview with Bo Yeager Sheldon, and there's a panel that they and I did all about why safety tools are so difficult. And part of it is just we as a culture don't know how to have uncomfortable conversations. By and large, people are like, no, it's too achy. I don't want to go there. And it's like, well, if you don't go there, you'll never get there. Which is kind of the grand irony of it. And part of it is just people don't know how to talk about it. Again, my background is I've worked a lot in the field of sexual trauma and sexual abuse. So going to the uncomfortable is not something that's very uncomfortable for me. Professionally, I've been doing that for 2 decades. So yeah, I get it. why it's uncomfortable for folks, but really it, especially if you use a tool like Script Change, where the goal isn't what don't we include, but it also has a lot of elements of what we should celebrate in our game. The same thing any GM does at the end. You're like, hey, do you like the session tonight? What everybody dig? What'd you like? That they call it highlight reels in Script Change. So everybody does their highlights, like Jackie Chan's best stunts at the end of any movie of his. That's what a highlight reel is. So that way you're not poo-pooing ideas. You're celebrating what your group enjoys, which you then just fold back into the product, and everybody just keeps having a better time.
Yeah, there's a lot of GM advice that goes beyond how you should balance this encounter mechanically that I think people may not even be aware how much they are looking for it, but would help a lot.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Save Against Fear a minute ago. I want to circle back to that so we can talk a little more about what that is, when and where it happens, and how people can be involved if they want to be.
Do you want me to do that now, or?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So Save Against Fear is the annual fundraiser game con that is run second week in November in York, PA. It is currently, next year will be our 14th year of Save Against Fear. And it started at a little bitty store in New Holland, PA called 6 Feet Under Games. And it started for pretty much their people, their regulars, like 35 people. And we're getting back up to pre-COVID numbers. We've got a little over 400 this year, which it's a nice little intimate. I mean, if you've never been to a con, people say it's the perfect first con to go to because because a lot of people go, oh, so it's like therapy at the con. No, not at all. It's just a weekend of, it's like a mini PAX Unplugged or a mini Gen Con where, we have a bunch of vendors, bunch of crafters, we have a ton of GMs, ton of board game people, and it's just getting together with a community of gamers to celebrate the hobby. But at the same time, the thing that bonds us is that we talk about what games have meant to us and we share those stories with each other because it, gives a little bit more to this hobby. Now, we do also run a professional conference that we started. Actually, this year is the first year that we broke the conference as a separate event where we got 16 different speakers, all talking about the way that they use games, either in educational settings, therapeutic settings, talking about things like, safety tools was a panel at this year's Save. We're still getting the videos finished so we can put this year's videos up on our YouTube and Twitch. But yeah, they'll all be available for free to the public because it's part about raising money for our programs and what we want to do. And I could definitely talk about that. But it's a great event that if you've never been to a Save, you definitely want to come on and take advantage. It's a great time. I know I already said we want to have you there next year.
Yeah. If there is even a single person that is interested in meeting me, I'm going to be there at the November 2024 Save Against Fear. I don't think it's been scheduled yet. Is that right?
We do have the date. It is the second weekend of next year, so I'm literally looking it up on my calendar here. That would be the weekend of the 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Okay. I'm excited for it. And I would tell people cons are fun. Cons can also be really overwhelming because they're just so huge. But this would be a good opportunity to get into something smaller.
Yeah, it's also one of the things that people always say is they come to our con and they're like, man, you have no issues whatsoever. Like there's no drama at your event. And I was like, well, any event organizer will tell you there's always drama at an event. But, the goal of an organizer is to make it that you don't know. You're just there to enjoy the con. That's our job. And we do a very good job at it. We're very accepting, open convention. We're very, 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 very heavy on enforcing our non-harassment policies, and we're very inclusive at our event. So yeah, we run a very tight ship because we're proud of it.
I am excited for it. There's not enough happens in Pennsylvania. It's a good place. We got PAX Unplugged, now Save Against Fear.
Yes. I like being just those two. That's a yeah. I like that.
Yeah,
We were
I went to my first Gen Con this year, and it was great, but it was also imposing. It's just so huge and so
It's
many
too
people.
much. Yeah, Gen Con should become like WrestleMania, where it's like 2 weeks leading up to the event. So you truthful like what is it, 7 different hotels or something like we went, I think it was 2018 or 2019 we went, and it was again, I loved it. I had a great time. It was great seeing people, but it was too big for me. It's like that's too much. PAX
Yeah.
is like just the largest that I'll go, with Origins being right under, like sweet spot.
And I did also want to talk about the fact that you have your own game coming out in a little while,
Yeah.
Branch Riders.
Yes, I'm trying to figure all my talking points here. So, Branch Riders is a role playing game that the Bodhana Group has developed, and it is set to be published through Onyx Path Publishing. And
Big fan
yeah,
of Onyx Path.
I love Onyx Path. I mean, Rich Thomas from Onyx. He's a member of our board of directors. It's one of the gents that represents the gaming industry. And the whole idea, just to give it a little bit of pastiche, is the tagline for it is 8 realms, 1 mission. And as a branch rider, you are kind of like a special forces kind of a team, although the game isn't military in any kind of way. It's not really a combat oriented game. But it's basically a game where there are 8 different realms, and each realm is connected, but they don't know of the other's existence because there's this force called the Blight. And the Blight seeks to create chaos, disharmony, because that chaos will break down the barriers between the worlds, and the blight will be able to take over everything. So as a branch rider, you can travel between the worlds and you can see the blight for what it is. So you kind of have this special ability that enables you to go and fight these battles. Now, the battle may be a monster, or it may be a person who is overcome by hubris, or a person so racked with anxiety and fear that they're like attacking other people. So the people you're trying to help may be the inflicted themselves by the blight, because the blight isn't really like a thing, it's more of a force. So the interesting thing about the realms is each one is based on a genre conceit. So we have a fantasy realm, a post-apocalyptic realm, we have a crime noir realm, and each of these 8 different worlds, they can't know the other exists because that would create chaos. So you literally just jump from realm to realm, figuring out what's the problem, what's going on, how can we solve this, and you do it by way of typical skills that you would have in an RPG. But you also have gifts, which are flavored to the home realm that you come from. So one, for example, we have a realm called the Borderland, and it's an Old West realm. So one of the abilities you can get from the Old West realm is like a magical lasso. It's just a rope that you can use, just do fancy tricks and whatnot. And so you use the gifts in combination with your skills and the stats that we are calling your approaches. So instead of being like strength, dexterity, intelligence, etc., your approaches are you going to be social? Are you going to be observant? Are you going to be knowledgeable? Are you going to be creative? Um, or forceful? So it turns into well, what are you trying to do and what's your goal here? How are you approaching the problem? And it's a real simple mechanic. The die are from D4 to D12. Whether it's your approach, your skill, or your gift, and then there's a third die, you basically get 3 die total that you roll. Those die, if they are a 4 or higher, count as a success.
And is it D6s?
No, it's D4 all the way through D12.
Okay.
So you have this variety of die that you roll. If you get 3 successes, it's a yes and. If you get 2, it's a yes. 1 is either a yes but or a no but. And if you get 0 successes, it's a no and. There's never a nope, nothing happens. Nope, something has to happen. So it's also very narrative. We're very happy about it. We're very pleased with it. So far, we're at this point. We are in the editing phase with Onyx Path, so that it's gone through manuscript approval. They're going through editing just to whatever things we might have missed, and I have no dates because I've been told we don't give dates until we have dates. But we are hoping sometime during 2024 to do our Kickstarter for the system. And the book we give you a selection of blights we've created. There's a ton of gifts, abilities. Even within, there's even rules on how if you want to create your own settings or your own realms, there's a guide on how you can create or alter the settings. You can create your own gifts, your own powers. So it's very customizable. Now, the coolest thing is the exposure tracker. That's your third die. And exposure is basically how aware the blight is that you're hunting it down. So
Oh.
the more drama you create, the higher your exposure meter goes.
It's especially cool because it's a good way to not get the players to go too crazy with what they're doing in a given situation. You got to
Yep.
balance it. You have to maintain cover, sort of like another Onyx Path game, Demon: The Descent.
Oh my gosh, that's a deep cut right there, David. That's like Promethean.
They're two games that are very good, and you should play them, but you won't. Nobody does.
It was like, I do vampire, I do werewolf. Okay. But yeah, so I mean, in the exposure, basically, the higher the exposure is, your die lowers. Your exposure die is the last die that you roll in your
Okay.
3 die pool. So it's also cool because if you're using a gift at either the what we call the world level, which is you can use it for self, other, or world, and that's where some of the therapy kind of gets mixed in. So basically, if you're using a world gift, you're using immense power. So obviously, people are going to go, wait a minute, something's not quite right about you. You're not from around here, are you? But that then increases the exposure meter. So there's a lot of risk reward built into it. But it's also a tool that's in the middle of the table when you play. So everyone knows what the exposure is.
Oh, neat.
So it's also a ticker for like as the bad guys, villain's gonna villain no matter how long you sit around and plan. So yeah, we've tried to build a lot of really cool stuff into the system. And at its heart, we didn't want to create exclusively a therapy game because usually when you get quote unquote saddled with that label, it's therapy game, great. No, what we found is a lot of people during the trainings that we run have said over the years, well, how do you come up with all these ideas? How do you come up with these settings in these worlds? So we said, well, okay, let's create a system that's easy to play, that's narrative driven, always moving the story forward, but let's create worlds that inherently cause therapeutic topics to be easier. But if you're just playing for fun, then they're just dramatic stories. Like another weird example is we have a realm called the Heights, which is a superhero realm. So the Heights is basically it's kind of like Mystery Men. There's heroes that like everybody has a
Another
super.
deep cut.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I'll do a ton of deep cuts. I'm waiting to watch the MASH 40th anniversary or 50th anniversary special tonight. Um, but the cool thing in this world is we've combined a superhero genre, which is very popular for role playing games. But in this world, all of the heroes are kept in check because the villains created Cakebook, which is a social media app that now they're watching everything that you do. So therapeutically, you can build in lessons about social media and what your identity is and what you're presenting and what you put out there. Like you can have a lot of these deep conversations, or it's just a really fun adventure about like this villain trying to get you to like raise his cape book rating. Like we wanted to mix genres that we knew people loved to play with the idea that if you were using it therapeutically or for educational or skill building goals, it's built for you to more easily use it for that purpose, but inherently it is not a quote unquote therapeutic role playing game.
And it is interesting to hear you talk about how it is sort of challenged based. People don't necessarily understand that therapy is not somewhere you go to like just feel better about yourself. It's somewhere where you go to be challenged and have an
Yeah.
objective observer try to make you grapple with things you would ignore otherwise.
Yeah.
And that is so that's the driving force for the game and these settings. I don't want to get into it too much, but it's especially interesting compared to Candela Obscura, which came out recently. There was a lot of discussion about how well it approached certain issues, and specifically about the fact that it's sort of too nice a setting to make a great place for a horror game, which is what it's supposed to be.
We even kind of talk about, in because we have a facilitators guide that's going to come out with the game specifically for therapists and educators, and if you're working with kids in any stripe, you could use it. But we wanted specifically to say, no, there's an Old West setting. If you wanted, you could get like Deadlands Dark in this if you wanted. Like, this isn't like Smurf Village. Because much, and kind of like an homage to how much I love Pugmire, there is a code to the Branch Riders, and the Branch Riders code, of course, is written with. Wait a minute, was that a good idea? You did that? Like, I don't know if I buy into the Branch Riders literature anymore. Like, let's go. So it's not, like happy smiley face. You could play it that way if you wanted. We often joke around in our trainings that our training is like telling you where the Legos are, or the Lego. Sorry, I don't want anybody to flame me because I said Lego. Uh, but that you could just build it whatever you would want it or need it to be, because that's the essence of the therapeutic role play. But we also knew that having a very narrative system, like that thing I said earlier about there being no nil result of, I'm playing Cthulhu, I'm rolling to investigate, I don't make my investigation roll. Well, it's kind of a short mystery then if I can't find any of the clues. So we wanted to make something that was more, nope, something's always happening. Whether it's good or bad, the story always moves forward, because that's also how therapy works.
Is it at all surprising to you that I'm hearing all of these things that are applicable to using a role-playing game for therapy, and it seems like they're just good for role-playing games anyway. There's just sort of things people should already be doing. I guess I'll back up a little bit. How did you first realize you wanted to start this group doing the work the way you're doing?
Well, originally Bodhana was founded on the idea of specifically, and this is kind of part where our name originally came from and how it morphed over the years. So originally we were a group of persons who had all worked with not only youth who had undergone sexual trauma, but we also worked a lot with perpetrators of sexual abuse, children and adolescents specifically. And when the company that we were working for closed down, we were all like, literally, we were out of a job. We were like, holy crap, like they're shutting down facilities, going to community based healthcare. We have, like, our livelihood is done. So we started wanting to do like trainings and consultation, and we were originally envisioning using Buddhist psychology and, Buddhist thought to help persons with sexually problematic behaviors. After about a year or so, we were like, oh, there's not a lot of training dollars out there. We ironically needed money. So, well, I shouldn't say ironically, hashtag nonprofit life, but so we went, holy crap, we need money. And that's when Save Against Fear started. And when we ran Save, we had never been to a convention. And the whole name of Save Against Fear was we were raising money to help also talk about, save against the fear of talking about sexual abuse, because we need people, perpetrators need help, victims need help, everybody in this side of the coin needs help. So the original name of Bodhana it's a Sanskrit word meaning leading to an awakening or an understanding. So originally it was using Buddhist thought. When we held the first save, and this is where Rich Thomas comes into the picture, and he always tries to tell me, no, don't give me that credit. I don't need credit for this. Him and I had great conversations because he was one of the first sponsors for Save Against Fear, oh, so many years ago. And he had shared with me how people had been writing into Onyx Path, and even before then, oh my gosh, I can't remember the company. Oh, I'm a sieve right now. Um, the original company that produced like Vampire the Masquerade and stuff, they have been getting letters over the years about people going through the World of Darkness settings, working on their personal traumas through the fabric of the narrative. And this is without the guidance of a therapist. So this kind of got us thinking after this conversation with Rich about, wait a minute, is there more to this hobby that we've gotten so much out of? What did we get out of it anyway? Like, so we started analyzing our own role playing, and whether it was me helping to develop my confidence because I had very low self-esteem, got picked on a lot as a kid, divorced parents, yada yada. But role playing was really instrumental in helping me become more of who I am. So we all kind of analyzed our own role play, saw some of the therapy behind it. Now that we were all master's level therapists, they were like, hey, wait a minute. If we guided this process, if we did this whole idea of design intention and planning, can we use them? So we started to like, okay, narrative therapy kind of works like that, and expressive arts therapy, art therapy, drama therapy, psychodrama, even techniques from rational emotive behavioral therapy, eclectic, all kinds of traditions. I mean, hell, Freud talked about role playing, way back at psychoanalysis. Like, so the idea of role play for self discovery is not at all a foreign concept, but it was that idea of, we originally we didn't intend for gaming to be our direction, but after we ran that first save, we started going down that rabbit hole, and we started to analyze it as professionals as opposed to just fans of the hobby. And over time, through running Save Against Fear, we heard more people's stories, and that started illuminating a lot more for us. So it started to awaken us to, wait a minute, okay, so there's this person that uses it in drug and alcohol therapy purely to give people something to do besides use. Okay, that's a possibility, as we hadn't thought about that. So literally it's the community that has grown around us, because we've been doing this solidly as a practice for about 10 years. Our first formal therapeutic group is with a group named Olivia's House. It's a national grief and loss center, or nationally recognized grief and loss center that's based in York. And we just ran the saddest adventure this side of the first 10 minutes of Up for a bunch of kids who had lost a primary parent. And it was pretty much, it kind of went from there. And now, we have journal peer reviewed published research. They were the first study that we know of its kind to use actual metrics as opposed to just quantitative data, which is huge. Because usually it's like, Bob's been role playing for 30 years. How do you think that's helped you out, Bob? We're like, no, we're measuring adults with social anxiety. So let's actually use metrics that you use to measure severity of social anxiety. Let's see if this works.
It's
You
nice to hear, because I'm trying to get myself more educated on the scholarship of how role playing actually affects people and what you can do with it. And it seems fairly young. It seems fairly undeveloped. But part of it is just I didn't happen to know about your group, and I'm going to share some of these resources with people so that you can look into it more. It's really fascinating, the things that can happen when you let yourself experience a game and let it be more than I am going to be a pretend elf and I am going to fight some orcs. As you do it, as you let yourself get into the character, it can develop a lot more. And in a way, I'm not surprised at all to hear that it's being used in this robust therapeutic way.
Yeah, we use it with a lot of the clients that we work with are folks on the spectrum. But we've worked with transitional age youth, which is, kids going into the adult system from the teen system. We have adult groups that we run. We have kid groups, teen groups. We, do speaking engagements, special events like at libraries and gifted programs. Like there's a ton of application for gaming. it's all knowing what you want to use the game for and knowing how to monitor that it's not just play,
Yeah.
but it's play with purpose.
Is this something where you go to an agency and you're trying to explain what you do and how it's useful, and their heads start to explode because they don't understand D&D, or are people more receptive to it?
It's kind of a mix. To be honest, we initially our first battle because I mean, people say, you guys are like, trendsetters. You're like, forging the path. And I'm like, no, people have been doing this for a while. There are scholarly articles from like the early and mid '80s. People using D&D not as robustly as we do now, but I think that most people know what Dungeons and Dragons are, but if people don't know what a role play experience feels like, that's kind of the hardest sell.
Yeah.
So honestly, what I do is I use the Ghostbusters role playing game published by West End in 1986.
Wow, you're digging as far down as you can. That was the For those who don't know, that was the prototype for the Star Wars D6 system. They took
Correct.
Ghostbusters, really didn't make that many changes to it, and that became big West End system.
Yep. Yeah, and because the cool thing is it's four stats, four skills. That's it. And each of the skills are combined with a stat. Takes 5 minutes to make a character. Ghostbusters is fairly universal, but we've even stripped it down to be like, yeah, we can run a sci-fi game in it. We could run a fantasy game using that system. And we then actually just use the 30th and Lexington adventure that was in the rule book, and we say, hey, you give us an hour. We'll show you what role playing is. And we've used that to sell parents, administrations. We have a series of books on our website called the Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness series, which talk about RPG as well as board games. And it's a good primer that gives you kind of like, oh, this is how that works. And this is, but I mean, we're finding that more people are referring to it as D&D therapy as opposed to role-playing game therapy, which again, I have many issues with describing it
Sure.
that way. But I think that once we get through, yeah, we also use board games. Oh, like Monopoly? No, like Boot, or, like modern tabletop board gaming, like Trash Talk, which is a great game that I got at PAX. Um, it, that used to be the struggle, is explaining how it works. We've gotten a lot better at, well, here's a 5 minute communication game that I can bring to a conference and have out on our demo table, or that I'll use in like a presentation. Once people see it in action, they immediately resonate with it because play is primal. That you don't have to sell people on. What you do have to sell people on is how you monitor that it's actually being effective to your goals, which is like any other therapeutic or, change process work. Yeah, you got to show your work. That's how this is validated. And uh, there are a lot of folks that, talk about how easy it is to do this. And I'm always I won't say I'm skeptical, obviously, but I'm also very cautionary to say, don't just assume that you can get a group of 5 teens together, run a module, and you're good. Like, it's a lot more involved than that. And you don't have to take our training, but I do recommend for any professionals looking to do this, there's a lot of stuff, even if you're an experienced GM, get a training from someone who offers training in this particular modality or approach, because there's a lot you may not have thought of. It's different in enough ways from your regular role play group that are meaningful.
And
Like,
I wanted to ask about that as well. You have a more than one, if I remember correctly, training series that you offer. If for someone who wants to get into this kind of therapy, what does your training look like? And what do you think a model training should include?
sure. So the training that we have, it's designed in the same material is taught in both formats. We have, for those who like the dense slice of cake, we have 4 days of 8 hours each, which is our 101, our 201, and our 301 series. Our newest offering, and the next class starts actually January 24th, is our 16-week intensive course, where it's 16 weeks of 2-hour modules. And what we basically do is we start by, for those who may not know, what is a role-playing game? What is the history of the hobby? Because even though we're in the year of our Lord 2023, yes, there are still people who go, wait, is that devil game? And I go, well, hold on, wait, wait, am I speaking to Billy Graham? Like, what's going on? But we do talk a little bit about some of the myths and some of the things that still prevail. Then we go from the history of the hobby into how do therapeutic traditions or modalities connect to role playing. So we talk, where do the skills interface with the recreation? And then we basically take folks through an entire series of how we design characters, how we design settings, how we come up with storylines, how we create meaningful challenges, all pitted against the final project, which is something that, as far as I understand, is unique to our training, is that when you take the Bodhana model training, you are partnered with other professionals in the class, and from about week 4 all the way to the final project, you are creating a 2-hour therapeutic one-shot that you are going to run for other professionals in the training. So you are not only getting theory, you're getting practice in planning, you're also getting direct application and skill work by running a game. Because we have a lot of folks who have never GM'd who want to do this. We're like, well, you got to, get your feet wet at some point. But the other cool thing is that not only are you facilitating a session for someone, you are also then taking the part of client in this model. So you also know what it feels like to have a goal that you're working on, to see that goal represented in the narrative. That has been probably one of the biggest things that we have found. Like, there are people who are like, man, I'm ready to do this. I'm going to start a group as soon as I'm done with your training. And we get through that final exercise and people are like, I need more practice. And they're like, did you mean for that to happen? I go, no, you feel that you are not as confident as you thought you were. And that's a good thing. Go to a local game stores, run games for more than just your friends and your family. Go to a con and sample other people's GMing styles. Like, it is something that you need to build on consistently. So I would say that that's the thing that separates our training. The Bodhana model, we advertise it as play, learn, expand, because that's what it is. We want people to get better at this, so that way that this approach does have legitimacy, and that it's taken seriously. I still have professionals who go, oh, D&D, that's cool, man. I used to play that when I was like in junior high school. You still play that? Yes. So.
And I'm so happy to see your group out there doing the work, not just because I believe in the therapeutic model, but because these games can be really serious. I mean, we've all got the trope where people are teenagers in their basements with Mountain Dew and weed, just having a fun time with action. But there's so much more you can experience, even if you are just playing straight D&D. I've seen it, I've done it, and I'm glad that people are out there appreciating what this can do for those who need a safe environment to explore really difficult topics.
Yeah. Just as a side note, I think it goes without saying, but it's always good to mention it. Please, if you are not a trained or licensed therapist or an experienced therapist, do not attempt to do therapy. And even if you are trained professional, do not therapize your friends. Yeah. There very clear delineation between a therapeutic game and a for funsies game, as we call it.
And it's worth mentioning these training protocols that we've been discussing are intended for those who are already licensed therapists. So you've got a lot of school under your belt.
Licensed or degreed therapists. Yeah. I'm always fully on. I am not a licensed therapist. I'm a master's level therapist. So degreed, I just can't bill insurance.
And I know I've had you for about an hour, so I want to thank you for coming on. And if there's anything last you would want to talk about or plug, I'm going to make sure to have links to everything below so people can check out more literature on this and your organization specifically. But if there's anything else we should cover, please let me know.
trying to go over the normal hit list. We hit the trainings, we hit Save Against Fear, we hit Branch Riders, we hit just in general. Check us out on the web and see a lot of the cool stuff that we do. If you run especially if you're local, because we're both in the good old Keystone State. Please, we love doing programs, specialized trainings to organizations. So please, if you're an organization wants to bring gaming into your practice, reach out to us. We actually trained 4 different support hubs across the state who offer support to folks on the spectrum. And we just love doing what we do, talking about what we do, and please check us out. And thank you for first of all writing the article that included us about PAX, and also for doing this as well.
Yeah, it's really been lovely hearing from you. This is not the last time I'm going to see you. Again, I will be at Save Against Fear. You all, if you're watching, go to Save Against Fear. It's going to be a fun time in York, Pennsylvania.
All right.
All right, goodbye for now. I'm going to stop.